The air was thick with the scent of summer roses, their perfume mingling with the remnants of a day that promised forever but delivered despair. Carolyn's heart, once buoyant with love and anticipation, now lay heavy, a shipwreck sunk in the ocean of betrayal. The discovery had been accidental, a wrong turn taken on a path meant to lead her to surprise her fiancé, Michael, with an early dinner. Instead, the surprise was hers, and the meal turned to ash in her throat as she stood, frozen, at the threshold of Michael's apartment. The laughter that greeted her was a foreign sound, not meant for her ears. And there, in the embrace of another, was the man she had pledged her life to. Michael! Her voice, a fragile whisper, broke the moment like a stone through glass. The couple sprang apart, guilt and shock painting their faces in equal measure. Carolyn. It's not what it looks like, Michael stammered, his words tumbling out in a clumsy attempt at deception. The woman beside him, a stranger to Carolyn yet so intimately entwined with her life's most painful moment, wrapped a sheet around herself, her eyes darting between Michael and Carolyn, a silent participant in the unfolding drama. What it looks like, Carolyn's voice grew stronger, is that I've been living a lie. Tell me, how long? Her demand for the truth was met with silence, the kind that speaks louder than any confession. Michael's gaze fell to the floor, his silence a deafening roar in Carolyn's ears. The truth, it seemed, was too much to bear, even for him. I thought you were working late, Carolyn continued, the pieces of their shared life crumbling in her hands. All those nights, all those excuses, I trusted you. Michael's response was a study in evasion. Carolyn, I'm sorry. It just happened. I didn't mean for what? For me to find out. Her heart was breaking, the pain of physical force that threatened to crush her. Yes, no, I don't know. I'm sorry, Carolyn, truly. His plea was a knife, each word twisting deeper into her wounds. The silence that followed was a chasm, bridged only by the sound of Carolyn's departure, her steps heavy with the weight of her shattered dreams. As the door closed behind her, the finality of the moment was not lost on either of them. What had been a partnership bound for a lifetime had ended in a moment. The vows of love and fidelity dissolved in the harsh light of betrayal. In the solitude of her car, Carolyn allowed the tears to fall, each drop a testament to the love she had lost and the pain that now filled its place. The road home was a blur, her mind a whirlwind of memories and regrets, of moments shared and futures planned, all laid to waste by a single unforgivable act. The night stretched long and lonely before her, the silence of her apartment, a stark contrast to the chaos of her thoughts. There, amidst the remnants of her former life, Carolyn faced the dawning realization that the journey ahead was one she must walk alone, her heart a compass shattered by betrayal. The seasons turned, each day bleeding into the next with the monotonous certainty of a life stripped of its color. Carolyn found herself adrift in a sea of solitude, her heart an island isolated by the treacherous waters of betrayal. The office, once a place of ambition and camaraderie, now felt like a mausoleum of her former self, each corner a reminder of a happiness that seemed as distant as the stars. Her attempts at dating were half-hearted endeavors, orchestrated by well-meaning friends who could not bear to see her alone. But each encounter left her colder, the smiles and small talk of her dates, nothing but echoes of a life she could. One particularly dismal evening, Carolyn found herself seated across from Tom, an analyst from her office who had been pursuing her with a persistence that bordered on intrusive. "So, Carolyn, I've been meaning to ask you," Tom began, stirring his coffee in a nervous motion. "Would you like to go to the Tech Expo next weekend? I've got 2 tickets, and I thought it could be fun." Carolyn mustered a smile, the weight of her loneliness making even this simple interaction feel like a Herculean task. "Tom, that's kind of you, but I'm not really into tech. Plus, I think I need some time to myself." Tom's disappointment was palpable, his hopes dashed yet again. "Sure, I understand. Just thought it might be nice, to get out. Maybe some other time then. The conversation stumbled forward, a clumsy dance of words that neither enjoyed. Carolyn's thoughts wandered, her heart aching with a longing she could not quell. She missed the connection, the intimacy of being truly seen and understood by an. Yet the shadow of her past loomed large, a spectre that chilled any warmth that dared approach. As the evening wore on, Carolyn excused herself, claiming fatigue. Tom watched her leave, a mixture of resignation and concern in his eyes. He had seen the walls she had built around herself, walls he had no hope of breaching. The drive home was a blur, the city lights streaking past like distant galaxies. Carolyn's apartment welcomed her with its familiar silence, a silence that spoke volumes. She poured herself a glass of wine, the liquid's ruby depths, a mirror to her own turbulent emotions. Sitting on her balcony, Carolyn looked out at the night sky, a tapestry of stars spread wide and indifferent above her. She spoke to the stars, her voice a whisper carried away by the night breeze. "Why does it hurt so much?" she asked, the words barely audible. "Why can't I let go and move on?" But the stars offered no answer, their light a cold comfort to the warmth she sought. The wine turned bitter in her mouth, a reflection of the bitterness that had taken root in her heart. As she retired to bed, Carolyn realized that her year of solitude had changed her. The pain had not dulled. Instead, it had crystallized, forming a barrier between her and the world. She longed to break free, to find joy and love again, but the path forward was shrouded in the fog of her own fears and doubts. Lying in the darkness, Carolyn whispered a vow to the shadows. "I will find a way out of this loneliness." But as sleep claimed her, she wondered whether she was strong enough to keep that promise, whether the echoes of her loneliness would ever truly fade into silence. The monotony of Carolyn's days was broken by an unexpected announcement at the office. A new colleague, Frank, was joining the marketing team, and his reputation as a dynamic professional preceded him. The buzz of anticipation among her co-workers was palpable, a contrast to the numbness that had become Carolyn's constant companion. On his first day, Frank brought with him a breath of fresh air. His arrival was like a beam of sunlight, piercing through the clouds of Carolyn's disinterest. Tall, with an easy smile and eyes that sparkled with humour, he introduced himself to the team, his voice carrying a warmth that seemed to reach out and touch Carolyn personally. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Frank. I'm thrilled to be here and look forward to working with all of you. I hope we can make some great strides together." Carolyn watched from her desk, her curiosity piqued. It had been a long time since anyone had caught her attention, but there was something about Frank that felt. As the days passed, Frank proved to be more than just a competent colleague. His passion for his work was evident, and his willingness to collaborate and listen endeared him to the team. Carolyn found herself drawn to him, his presence stirring emotions he thought had withered away. One afternoon, as Carolyn was wrestling with a particularly challenging project, Frank approached her desk. "Hey, Carolyn, how's it going? That project looks like a tough nut to crack." Startled, Carolyn looked up, meeting Frank's concerned gaze. "Oh, hi, Frank. Yeah, it's a bit of a headache. I'm not sure I'm on the right track." Frank leaned against her desk, his interest genuine. "Mind if I take a look? Sometimes a fresh pair of eyes can help." Together, they pored over the project, Frank's insights proving invaluable. As they worked, their conversation flowed naturally, laughter mingling with the serious discussion of strategies and ideas. "Thanks, Frank," Carolyn said as they wrapped up, a smile playing on her lips for the first time in months. "I really appreciate your help." "Anytime, Carolyn. It was fun working with you." "We make a great team," Frank replied, his smile mirroring hers. In that moment, Carolyn felt a spark, an ember of connection that warmed her from within. It was a feeling she had almost forgotten, the simple joy of sharing a moment with someone who understood. Over the following weeks, Carolyn and Frank found themselves collaborating more frequently, their meetings filled with productive discussions and an easy camaraderie. Carolyn began to look forward to seeing Frank, to the moments they shared that seemed to lighten the burden of her loneliness. One particularly late evening, as they were the last two left in the office, Frank turned to Carolyn with a spontaneous suggestion. "Carolyn, it's been a long day. How about we grab a bite to eat? My treat. We can call it a celebration for cracking that project wide open." Carolyn hesitated, the shadows of her past reluctance a familiar weight. Yet, looking into Frank's inviting eyes, she felt the weight lift, replaced by an unfamiliar sense of hope. "You know what? That sounds great. Let's do it," Carolyn found herself saying, her heart beating a little faster with the prospect of spending more time with Frank outside the confines of work. As they left the office together, Carolyn felt a flicker of excitement, a precursor to possibilities she had thought were forever closed to her. Perhaps, she dared to think, this was the beginning of something new, something beautiful. The night ahead promised laughter and conversation, but for Carolyn, it held much more. It was a step toward healing, toward opening her heart again. And as they stepped into the cool evening air, she allowed herself to believe in the potential of unexpected sparks, of new beginnings born from the ashes of past heartaches. The dinner with Frank was a revelation for Carolyn. As they shared stories over plates of pasta, she found herself laughing freely, caught up in the ease of his company. It was a night that lingered in her mind, a beacon of light in the gloom that had shrouded her heart. In the days that followed, Carolyn's thoughts often drifted to Frank. She was drawn to his vibrant spirit, a stark contrast to the shadows that had become her constant companions. The connection she felt with Frank was undeniable, and yet a part of her remained guarded, fearful of the vulnerability that came with opening her heart. It was during one of their collaborative sessions that Carolyn found herself facing a dilemma. Frank had mentioned his love for travel, his stories filled with adventures in distant lands. Carolyn, eager to maintain the illusion of a kindred spirit, found herself weaving a tapestry of lies. "Oh, I love to travel too," Carolyn said, her voice laced with a feigned enthusiasm. "Last year, I spent some time in Italy. It's such a beautiful country." Frank's eyes lit up with interest. "Italy, that's amazing. I've always wanted to go there. What was your favourite part?" Caught in the web of her own deception, Carolyn scrambled for details that would lend credibility to her lie. Well, the Amalfi Coast was breathtaking. "The views, the sea, it's like something out of a dream." "That sounds incredible," Frank responded, his admiration evident. "I've read so much about it, but hearing it from someone who's actually been there makes it seem even more magical." The conversation moved on, but Carolyn felt a twinge of guilt for the falsehood she had spun. She had wanted to impress Frank, to forge a deeper connection based on shared interests. Yet, in her attempt to paint a picture of perfection, she had strayed from the truth, building a facade that now stood between them. As their relationship deepened, Carolyn found herself caught in a cycle of embellishments. Each lie, no matter how small, added another layer to the illusion she had created. She spoke of skydiving adventures, of culinary escapades in exotic locales, and of art she had never seen. With each tale, she saw Frank's admiration grow, but so too did the fear that he was falling for a version of her that didn't exist. One evening, as they sat in a cozy cafe, Frank's voice broke through Carolyn's thoughts. "You know, Carolyn, one of the things I admire most about you is your sense of adventure. You've lived such an interesting life." Carolyn's heart sank. The admiration in Frank's eyes was for a persona she had crafted, not for the woman who sat before him, riddled with insecurities and haunted by past heartbreaks. "Frank, Carolyn began, the weight of her deceit heavy on her tongue. But the words of confession were lost, swallowed by the fear of losing the connection they had built. The evening ended with laughter and promises to plan a trip together, a trip Carolyn knew would never happen. As she lay awake that night, the illusion of perfection she had created loomed over her, a gilded cage of her own making. The lie had been a small one, a single thread in the tapestry of their relationship. But as Carolyn well knew, even the smallest thread, once unravelled, could lead to the undoing of the entire weave. The question that haunted her was not if the truth would come to light, but when, and whether the fragile bond she and Frank had formed could withstand the storm that would follow. As the weeks turned into months, the fabric of Carolyn's falsehoods became ever more intricate, each lie a delicate stitch that threatened to unravel at the slightest tug. The tales of her fabricated adventures had woven a colourful tapestry that Frank admired, but beneath its vibrant surface lurked the grey shadows of deception. One crisp autumn afternoon, as leaves danced in the wind outside their favourite coffee shop, Frank's excitement about a potential trip they could take together brought the weight of Carolyn's deceit crashing down around her. "Carolyn, I've been thinking," Frank began, his eyes alight with the prospect of adventure. "Why don't we actually plan that trip to Italy you always talk about? I've been saving up some vacation time, and I can't think of anyone I'd—" The enthusiasm in his voice was a punch to Carolyn's gut. She had painted herself into a corner, and now the very lies that had brought them closer threatened to tear them apart. "Oh, Frank, that sounds wonderful, but—" Carolyn faltered, searching for an exit that wouldn't reveal the truth. "I'm not sure I can get the time off work. You know how it is with the end-of-year projects piling up." Frank's face fell slightly, disappointment clouding his features, but he quickly masked it with a smile. "Of course I understand. Maybe another time then." Carolyn nodded, feeling the chasm between them widen with each lie. As they continued their conversation, she found herself spinning more tales to cover the tracks of her previous fabrications. She talked of a friend she didn't have who could get them exclusive access to vineyards in Tuscany, of a little-known bed and breakfast that was a hidden gem, and of the Italian lessons she was supposedly taking to prepare for the trip. Frank listened, captivated by the world Carolyn painted, a world as illusory as a mirage. "You have such amazing stories, Carolyn. I feel like I've lived 1,000 lives just listening to you." His words were meant as a compliment, but to Carolyn, they were a reminder of the vast gulf of untruths that lay between them. As they parted ways that afternoon, Carolyn's heart was heavy. She knew she was in too deep, her lies a tangled web from which there seemed no escape. The fear of losing Frank, of exposing the ordinariness of her real life, kept. But with each passing day, the stress of maintaining her facade grew heavier. Later that week, as they worked late on a project, Frank brought up the topic of trust, his voice casual, but his eyes searching. "You know, Carolyn, I've always believed that the foundation of any good relationship, be it friendship or something more—" Carolyn's heart skipped a beat. "Yes, of course. Honesty is essential," she agreed, her voice barely a whisper, her mind racing with the implications of her own dishonesty. Frank nodded, seemingly satisfied with her response, but Carolyn couldn't help but wonder if he sensed the discrepancies in her stories, the little inconsistencies that she feared had not gone unnoticed. That night, as Carolyn lay awake, the weight of her tangled web pressing down on her, she realized the true cost of her deception. She had wanted to be someone Frank could admire, someone worthy of his affection. Instead, she had become a stranger to herself, lost in a labyrinth of lies from which the realization was a bitter pill to swallow. In her quest for perfection, Carolyn had underestimated the value of authenticity, of being loved for who she was. The question now was not whether she could untangle the web she had woven, but whether she had the courage to face the consequences of her deception. The moment of truth arrived on an otherwise ordinary Tuesday, under the fluorescent lights of their favourite lunch spot, a cosy cafe where Carolyn and Frank had shared countless conversations and laughs. But today, the air was charged with an unspoken tension, the weight of Carolyn's deceit a silent third party at their table. As they sipped their coffee, Frank's phone buzzed with a message from a mutual colleague, a photo from a recent office outing with a caption that teased, "Frank and Carolyn's Italian adventure planning session." It was meant in jest, a nod to the running joke of their imminent trip to Italy. But to Carolyn, it felt like a spotlight on her web of lies. Frank chuckled, showing Carolyn the message. "Looks like we're famous now. Our Italian trip planning is the talk of the office." Carolyn forced a smile, her stomach twisting in knots. "Yeah, seems like it," she managed to say, her voice strained. There was a pause, and then Frank's expression sobered. "Carolyn, can I ask you something?" His voice was gentle, but there was a seriousness to it that made Carolyn's heart sink. "Of course," she replied, bracing herself. "I've been thinking about our trip, about all the stories you've shared," Frank began, his gaze steady on hers. "And I realized I don't know much about them beyond what you've told me. I mean, I've never seen any photos or heard these stories from anyone else." Carolyn's heart raced. This was it, the moment she had feared. She had hoped to avoid this confrontation indefinitely, but now, faced with Frank's honest inquiry, the walls of her illusion began to crumble. Carolyn hesitated, the words stuck in her throat. She knew she couldn't continue the charade any longer. The truth, however painful, had to come out. "I need to be honest with you. Those stories, my travels to Italy and all the adventures I told you about, they're not real." Frank's expression shifted from confusion to surprise, and then to Carolyn's dismay, to hurt. "Not real? What do you mean?" Carolyn took a deep breath, the words now flowing from a place of deep remorse. "I mean, I made them up. I've never been to Italy. I've never done half the things I told you I did. I wanted to impress you, to make you think I was more interesting than I really am. And once I started, I didn't know how to stop. I'm so sorry, Frank." There was a heavy silence, filled with the weight of Carolyn's confession and the gravity of her deceit. Frank leaned back, processing her words, his disappointment palpable. "Why, Carolyn?" His voice was soft, but the pain behind it cut through her. "Why would you feel the need to lie about something like that? Did you think I wouldn't be interested in the real you?" Carolyn's eyes filled with tears, the magnitude of her mistake crashing down on her. "I was afraid," she admitted. "Afraid that my real life wasn't enough, that I wasn't enough. I thought that if I could be someone more exciting, more adventurous, you'd like me more. But I was wrong. I see that now. I'm so sorry, Frank." Frank was quiet for a moment, his disappointment mingling with a sadness that made Carolyn's heart ache. "Carolyn, I liked you for you. Your kindness, your humor, your intelligence. That's what drew me to you, not some fabricated adventures. Honesty is everything to me, and this hurt." Carolyn nodded, the tears now freely flowing. "I understand if you can't forgive me, Frank. I've betrayed your trust, and I can't undo that. But I want you to know that lying to you is my biggest regret." The cafe around them continued its gentle hum, oblivious to the heartbreak unfolding at their table. Frank took a deep breath, his own emotions a turmoil of disappointment and a lingering affection that made the betrayal all the more painful. "I need some time, Carolyn," he said finally, his voice steady but distant. "Time to think about all of this. I wish things were different." With those words, Frank stood up, leaving Carolyn alone with her guilt and the shattered pieces of their relationship. The moment of truth had come and gone, leaving behind a profound silence and a heart heavy with regret. As Carolyn sat there, the realization that she might have lost Frank forever was a bitter pill to swallow. But even more painful was the understanding that in her quest for acceptance, she had lost sight of the most important thing of all, the value of being true to one. In the days that followed their conversation at the cafe, Carolyn wrestled with a maelstrom of emotions. The office, once a sanctuary of shared smiles and whispered secrets between her and Frank, now felt like a battlefield strewn with the debris of their fractured relationship. Frank, though always polite, maintained a distance that felt like miles, a silent testament to the trust she had broken. Carolyn attempted to bridge the chasm with apologies left in voicemails and texts, each word a desperate plea for forgiveness. But Frank's responses were courteous yet non-committal, the warmth they once shared reduced to a courteous. One late evening, as Carolyn sat alone in the glow of her computer screen, her reflections were interrupted by a soft knock on her office door. It was Frank, standing in the doorway, his face a mask of unresolved feelings. "Can I come in?" he asked, his voice betraying a hint of the old warmth. Carolyn nodded, her heart in her throat. "Of course, Frank." He walked in, taking a seat opposite her. The air between them was thick with unsaid words, a tension that Carolyn longed to dispel. "I've been doing a lot of thinking," Frank began, his gaze meeting hers. "About us, about it." Carolyn held her breath, bracing for the words she feared would end their relationship for. "And I keep coming back to the same question," he continued, his expression pained. "Why, Carolyn? Why did you feel you had to create all those stories? Why didn't you trust me with the real you?" Carolyn's eyes filled with tears, the weight of her actions bearing down on her. "I was scared, Frank. Scared that I wouldn't measure up, that the real me wouldn't be enough for you. I thought if I could make you see me as this adventurous, interesting person, you'd like me more. But I was wrong. All I did was push you away." Frank sighed, a deep, weary sound that seemed to carry all the disappointment and hurt of the past weeks. "Carolyn, the person I was getting to know, the person I was starting to have feelings for was you, the real you, not some character out of a storybook. I liked you for your kindness, your intelligence, your genuine personality. That's who I wanted to spend time with." Carolyn's heart ached with regret. "I'm so sorry, Frank. I never wanted to hurt you. I just got caught up in the lie and didn't know how to get out. But I understand if you can't forgive me. I've broken your trust and I don't know if I can ever repair that." Frank's face softened, the anger and hurt giving way to a sad resignation. "I wish things could be different, Carolyn. I really do. But trust is fundamental, and right now, I don't know if we can get that back. Maybe with time, we can find a way to be friends again. But for now, I think it's best if we give each other some space." The finality in his voice was a knife through Carolyn's heart. She had hoped, however foolishly, for a chance to make things right, to rebuild what she had so carelessly destroyed. But she knew Frank was right. The damage was done, and the path to healing, both for herself and for Frank, would be a long one. "Okay," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I understand. I'll give you space. And Frank, I am truly sorry. For everything." Frank nodded, a gesture of acknowledgement tinged with sadness. "I know you are, Carolyn. And I'm sorry too. Sorry that we couldn't find a way through this." With those parting words, Frank stood and left Carolyn's office, leaving her to face the silence and the magnitude of her loss. The illusions she had crafted had shattered, leaving behind the stark reality of a future without Frank. In the solitude of her office, Carolyn realized the hardest lesson of all, that in seeking to weave a tapestry of lies to make herself appear more interesting, she had lost sight of the beauty and worth of her own truth. The journey back to herself, to authenticity and self-acceptance, would be her greatest challenge yet. But it was a challenge she knew she had to face, for only in embracing her true self could she hope to find peace, and perhaps one day, a love built on the unshakable foundation of honesty. Months had passed since the day Frank walked out of Carolyn's office, leaving behind a silence that spoke volumes. The office, once a place of shared glances and whispered jokes, now echoed with the quiet hum of productivity, a reminder of what had been lost. Carolyn had thrown herself into her work, each project a step toward rebuilding her confidence, her sense of self. But it wasn't just her professional life that Carolyn sought to mend. The realization of her mistakes, the pain of losing Frank, had spurred a journey of self-discovery. She attended workshops, read voraciously, and spent many evenings in reflection, piecing together the fragments of her identity she had long ignored in her quest for acceptance. It was on a crisp spring morning, with the world around her bursting into life, that Carolyn found herself walking the familiar path to the office. The air was filled with the promise of new beginnings, a promise that today felt within reach. As she approached the office, her steps slowed, her heart catching in her throat. There, standing by the entrance, was Frank. He looked up, his eyes meeting hers, and for a moment, time seemed to stand still. "Carolyn," Frank said, his voice breaking the silence between them. "Frank," Carolyn replied, her voice a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Frank took a step forward, his expression one of determination. "I've been doing a lot of thinking about us, about everything that happened. And I realized I miss you, Carolyn. Not the stories, not the adventures, but you. The real you." Carolyn felt a surge of emotions, a mix of hope and fear. "Frank, I've missed you too. So much. But I understand if you can't forgive me. I wouldn't blame you." Frank shook his head, a small smile playing on his lips. "I've had time to think, to put things into perspective. And I've come to realize that people make mistakes. It doesn't define them, not entirely. What matters is what we learn from those mistakes, how we grow." Carolyn looked at him, her eyes brimming with tears. "I've learned so much, Frank. About myself, about what it means to be honest, not just with others, but with myself. I'm not the same person." "I know," Frank said, stepping closer. "I can see that. And that's why I'm here. I want to see if we can start over, build something new, not on illusions, but on the truth, on who we really are." Carolyn reached out, her hand finding Frank's. "I'd like that. More than anything." Frank grasped her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "Then let's take it one day at a time. See where this journey takes us." As they stood there, hand in hand, Carolyn felt the weight of the past months lift. It wasn't going to be easy rebuilding what had been broken. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, but as she looked into Frank's eyes, she saw not just the promise of a new dawn, but the glimmer of a future where honesty, forgiveness, and love could flourish. "Come on," Frank said, with a warmth that reached deep into Carolyn's heart. "Let's go to work." Together, they walked into the office, not just as colleagues, but as two individuals embarking on a journey of rediscovery, of healing. A journey that promised not just professional growth, but the growth of a bond built on the solid foundation of truth and mutual respect. And as the doors closed behind them, Carolyn knew that whatever the future held, she was ready to face it head-on, with honesty, with courage, and with a heart open to the endless possibilities of a new dawn. Let us know in the comments how this story has inspired you, or share your own experiences of overcoming adversity. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more heart-touching stories like this one. Hit the bell icon to stay updated with our latest uploads. Your journey through the complexities of the human heart starts now. Remember, your story isn't over yet. It's just a new chapter beginning. Stay strong. Stay inspired.